I talk about the article itself, let me talk a little bit about 200 Million Artisans and how it all began. And it actually began in Boston, to be honest. And 200 Million Artisans really started out as a COVID response platform when I was still in Boston. And back then, and people often ask about the number and the name, why 200 Million Artisans? So I had just written an article back then around the creative economy. And so the interesting data point that I came across was that official figures in India talk about how there are 7 million artisans. And this was measured after 65 years of independence. And unofficially, according to many sources, they say that there are about 200 million livelihoods linked to the artisan sector. Now, in a country that has about 1.3 billion people, or perhaps more now, 200 million people is a big number for us to not talk about policy, for us to not talk about investment, for us to not talk about infrastructure. So when we first started out as a COVID response platform, I remember speaking to many investors, funders, saying, hey, this is such a big sector. Why don't we do something about it? There is so much potential. And it kept coming back to just one thing. They all turned around and said, you claim that this is such a big sector, but where are the proof points? And after a point, it became a chicken and egg situation where we realized that, somebody had to collect the data points. Somebody had to drive the research. Somebody had to, really build the case for the sector, because we were seeing enterprises, we were seeing the artisans, we were seeing the kind of value that they were adding. And I think that's how really the mission and purpose for 200 Million Artisans came about. So today we, like Laurie mentioned, we are an ecosystem enabler, supporting people from all walks of life to harness the potential of the artisan economy by delivering research-led insights, innovative strategy, and what we call collaborative impact. And as part of this goal, really to build actionable insights and evidence for the sector, we piloted Business of Handmade. It's an open source umbrella platform to make research relevant to the artisan sector, accessible to everyone. And under this, Business of Handmade 2021 focused on informality as seen from a global South perspective, because most conversation and discourse around, say, the creative economy, informality, formality, business, really emerged from the global North, and then it's sort of adopted by countries like us. But this was sort of flipping that narrative a bit. And the research was commissioned by the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center and supported by the British Council. Really thankful for that. And it presents an immersive multimedia research and talks about the relationship between the informal economy and the cultural economy through the eyes of 12 formal craft-based enterprises. And mind you, like Laurie mentioned, the informal economy contributes to 60% of the global workforce. And India, the number is obviously much higher, it's 90%. But unfortunately, and all our systems for investment, for structure, infrastructure, whatever it is that we, and even policy are designed for that 10% formal ecosystems that we all operate within, the 9-to-5 jobs and so on and so forth. So this was our way of sort of talking about, the businesses that were navigating the challenges around informality in countries like India. And especially how these formal enterprises, social and creative enterprises, really navigate or work with informal artisan communities and how they draw them into the formal economy. So through these stories, we engaged with like a spectrum of enterprises. These micro to medium size. They came from diverse geographies. They were for-profit, non-profit, social enterprises, design-led, artisan-led. So there's a wide array of stories that you can check out on businessofhandmade.com. And the study in some ways was also designed to understand what are these intertwined networks and that the ecosystem of customs and conventions that sort of guide and shape how business decisions are made and how resources are organized or how profits are shared and so on and so forth. Because obviously enterprises that work with informal communities have to operate very, very differently. and very differently from how we know businesses to operate in everyday life. So, and the one thing that kept coming back to us over and over again as we listen to the stories of these enterprises, and we listen to the kind of impact that they were carrying out, was the incredible contribution of women working in these dispersed rural communities out of their homes. And somewhere, you could say, as a woman-led team, we realized that these are stories that have remained invisible, and they remain invisible even today. And that is a huge systemic problem. And I think we all take these things for granted, that, housework is something that we take for granted, or, things, taking care of our children is something that we take for granted as women. And somewhere when we listened to the stories of these women, it also reflected on the larger challenges that we were seeing in the global economy, where the productive capacities and the value that women bring to the table has been completely ignored in the larger sort of schematics of investment policy and so on and so forth.